She thought she was finally free, free from a suffocating life in Manhattan, free from expectations, free to explore the world on her own terms. But when Lena checked into a boutique hotel in rural Nigeria, she never imagined the welcome would come with a proposal. The manager called it tradition. His son called her wife. And when she tried to leave, the doors wouldn't open. What do you do when hospitality turns into hostage-taking, and no one is who they say they are? Lena stepped off the rickety local bus and into the humid embrace of a small Nigerian town she'd never even heard of until she booked the ticket 2 days earlier. The sun clung low over the horizon, casting golden beams across dusty roads, stalls bursting with fruit, and curious eyes that followed her every move. Her hotel, quaint, colonial style, surrounded by bougainvillea and advertised online as safe, serene, and family-owned, looked charming, even picturesque. The manager, a greying man in traditional attire named Mr. Bakare, greeted her with the warmth of a long-lost uncle. His smile was broad, his handshake firm, and his insistence on carrying her bag immediate. "You are most welcome, Miss Lena. You will be treated as one of our own here," he said with a practiced lilt that made her both relaxed and slightly on edge. There was a formality in his eyes, a ceremonial way in how every staff member bowed slightly and whispered to one another as she passed. Inside, the hotel was quiet. Too quiet. No other guests. No reception bell. No visible cameras. Yet fresh flowers adorned every hallway, and her room was immaculately prepared, down to a note card on her pillow that read, "Rest well, our honored guest." Lena laughed nervously, brushing it off as a cultural difference. Still, as she showered and stared into the antique mirror with its tiny cracks at the edge, she caught a brief flicker behind her, like someone had just stepped out of the doorway. She turned. Nothing. Her door was locked. But the unease had started to sink in. That night, the electricity cut off for 20 minutes. A soft knock came on her door during the blackout. "Power will return shortly," a voice said. But it wasn't staff, it was too young, too male. She didn't respond. In the dim moonlight outside, she could just barely make out the silhouette of someone standing under a mango tree, watching her window. She drew the curtain. The next morning, things took an eerie turn. At breakfast, a plate was already waiting for her, piping hot, as if someone had timed her waking precisely. Mr. Bakare sat with her, sipping his tea. "We are very honored to have such a fine young woman from America. My wife passed away many years ago. My son, he is also alone. Perhaps this is fate." Lena blinked, unsure if she misheard. She laughed, unsure if it was a joke. "I'm just here to travel," she said. "Ah," he replied, eyes twinkling. "That is how many things begin." She tried to focus on her itinerary. She planned to visit the local waterfalls, perhaps join a tour to the wildlife reserve, maybe even meet a few fellow travelers. But the local guide she messaged didn't respond. The tour agency's phone number was no longer in service. Even her mobile data was sluggish and intermittent. At lunch, Mr. Bakare brought her a traditional dish and placed it himself on her table. "You remind me of my wife," he said solemnly, before the world turned her bitter. As the days passed, the charm of the hotel turned into something else entirely. The staff began to address her as Madam. A teenage girl handed her a folded note, giggled, and ran away. The note simply read, "Say yes. It is better." Lena was done pretending it was normal. She decided to leave. But her bus ticket couldn't be confirmed. The transport desk was suddenly under maintenance. A driver she hailed outside turned around once he saw which hotel she was staying in. Lena sat on her bed that night, hands trembling, as she realized she may have entered a place where customs were used as a mask, and her solo trip had just become a carefully laid trap. Before stepping foot in Nigeria, Lena had spent the last 6 months constructing a version of herself that could survive anywhere. She told friends and family it was a sabbatical, a break from burnout, but the truth was far messier. Her life in New York had imploded slowly, like a building undermined by silent corrosion. She had been an executive assistant to a powerful tech CEO, sharp, efficient, indispensable. But the glittering job came with poison-tipped perks, Late-night messages disguised as tasks, after-hours meetings where hands lingered too long, veiled ultimatums wrapped in expensive champagne. When she finally rejected his advances outright, the retaliation was swift and quiet. Her access was revoked, her bonuses cut, her name whispered around the office with just enough malice to stain her credibility. HR protected him, not her. Within weeks, she resigned. But quitting the job hadn't healed the wound. Worse still, her relationship with Noah, her long-term boyfriend, buckled under the weight of everything she couldn't say. He called her paranoid. He said maybe she had invited some of it. She left him the same day she boxed up her apartment. Lena hadn't told anyone she booked the ticket to Nigeria. Not her parents, not her best friend. She needed to disappear in a place no one could find her, where her name meant nothing and her past couldn't follow. But trauma has a way of hitchhiking, invisible but ever present. Even now, as she lay awake in her hotel bed under a ceiling fan that hummed like a mosquito's wings, she could feel the weight of Noah's disbelief, her boss's smirk, the silence of every colleague who turned away. It made her all the more determined to reclaim something, anything, that resembled control. That was the real reason she had chosen this path. She wanted to prove she could face the world alone and come out unbroken. Yet now, halfway across the globe, surrounded by people who watched her like she was a rare bird in a gilded cage, that resolve was starting to crack. She walked the hotel's perimeter that morning, noting things she hadn't before. How the back gate was padlocked, how the driver's quarters were empty, how the guards never spoke but always seemed to know where she was. She opened the tourist pamphlet she'd grabbed at the airport. Half the restaurants listed didn't exist, and the 2 tour guides she'd saved numbers for still weren't responding. She began to feel the old New York instinct creeping back in: observe, assess, survive. Back in the city, she'd learned how to navigate predators in suits. Now she needed to understand the rules of this new, smiling threat. Mr. Becker invited her to tea again that afternoon, in the garden courtyard beneath the jacaranda tree. The tea was sweet, served in delicate porcelain, and came with gentle questions. What do your parents do? You are not married. No children yet. Each inquiry wrapped in concern, but waited with expectation. She dodged them skillfully, but he seemed amused, as if watching a fish wriggle on a line. You are strong, he said. But strength is not always a blessing for a woman. It can make you lonely. Lena kept her expression neutral, but her pulse ticked upward. This wasn't idle conversation. It was a reconnaissance mission. He was gathering data. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered the hotel halls and passed by a room with its door slightly ajar. Inside, she saw a family photo. Mr. Becker, a boy in his 20s, and a woman who looked nothing like him. The son's face was familiar. He had been the one outside her room during the blackout. She ducked away quickly, adrenaline flooding her limbs. Returning to her room, she found a small woven basket left outside her door. Inside was a folded scarf, a bottle of scented oil, and a bracelet of cowrie shells. A note accompanied it, for the new daughter of the house. She sat on her bed, the bracelet dangling from her fingers, her mind racing. She had no proof, no crimes committed, just a mounting series of small, unsettling moments. But she knew manipulation when she saw it. She'd lived it. This wasn't a clumsy attempt at romance. It was a soft grooming of compliance. A system cloaked in custom. It made her skin crawl. In New York, she'd been gaslit by men in suits. Here, it was done with gifts and tea and kind eyes. Same predator, different mask. As Lena tried to piece together the bigger picture, she remembered something a coworker once told her: the scariest traps aren't the ones that lock you in. They're the ones that convince you staying is safer. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She packed her bag quietly, shoved her passport into the front pocket, and sat by the door until dawn, listening to every creak in the hallway. Tomorrow, she would leave, no matter what it took. But as she stared out the window at the courtyard, a shadow shifted behind the jacaranda tree, and she knew someone was watching. The morning air was thick with humidity, clinging to Lena's skin as she stepped into the courtyard with her backpack half-zipped and her sneakers damp from the dew-soaked grass. She had planned to slip out quietly at sunrise, convinced she could catch a passing minibus or hitch a ride with a vendor heading to a nearby town. But the minute she reached the iron gate, 2 uniformed guards stepped in front of her with polite but unmovable smiles. "Breakfast first, madam. Mr. Becker insists," one of them said. There was no force in his voice, no threat, just a quiet, unspoken refusal. She turned around, jaw clenched. The gate didn't even have a visible lock from her side. Back inside, the dining table was already set with fresh akara, pap, fried plantains, and bitter leaf soup, too elaborate for a normal morning meal. Mr. Becker sat at the head of the table in a pristine white kaftan, beaming like a proud father awaiting a homecoming. "You were up early," he said. "You must be excited. Today is a very special day." Lena gave a hesitant nod, trying to disguise the dread rising in her chest. Before she could ask what he meant, a young man entered the room. He was tall, well-dressed, and immediately fixated on her with unsettling intensity. "This is my son, Olamide," Mr. Becker said. "He's been looking forward to meeting you properly." The words landed like a hammer to her gut. It wasn't hospitality anymore. This was an arranged presentation, a formal introduction masquerading as coincidence. Olamide extended a hand, his smile tight, his gaze unblinking. "It is my honor," he said softly. Lena shook it out of reflex, instantly regretting it as he held her fingers just a second too long. Throughout breakfast, the men carried most of the conversation, about Olamide's aspirations, about the strength of family, about how Western women lacked structure. Lena tried to interject, to push back subtly, but every time she did, Mr. Becker would change the subject or Olamide would nod indulgently, like she was a child misunderstanding the wisdom of her elders. Then came the sentence that froze her in place. "We believe in destiny here," Mr. Becker said. "And it is not coincidence that you have arrived at this time. Olamide has been ready for marriage for some years now. We were simply waiting for the right spirit to walk through our door." Lena dropped her spoon. The rest of the day became a surreal theater of customs she didn't understand, rituals she hadn't agreed to. She was invited, or rather, required, to sit in the living area while women from the village came in to bless her with songs and gifts. They braided her hair with beads, painted her palms with henna, and whispered blessings in Yoruba. She wanted to scream, to explain that this wasn't her culture, her choice, her life, but she felt trapped by the politeness of it all. Every protest she made was met with a soft smile and a pat on the hand. "It is our way," one woman said. "You will learn." When Lena tried to escape to her room, she found her door had been moved to a different wing of the hotel, next to Olamide's. "For your comfort," she was told. By sunset, Lena's panic had reached a quiet, desperate boil. She feigned illness to avoid dinner, locking herself inside the new room and pushing a chair under the doorknob. The windows were barred, the Wi-Fi was still dead, and her phone showed no service. She tried to use the hotel's landline in the hallway, but the line rang dead. Her passport was still in her backpack, but she noticed her visa documents had been removed from the folder she kept them in. That's when it hit her, someone had searched her belongings. The next morning, Mr. Becker knocked gently at her door. "Lena," he said through the wood, "you must understand. We are not your enemy. But we cannot allow you to leave until the ceremony is complete. It would dishonor the spirits." Her hands trembled. "What ceremony?" she asked. A pause. "You have already accepted the gifts. You have already eaten with the family. You have already been seen. The village is aware. It would shame us all if you refused now." Lena didn't respond. Her voice wouldn't work. She pressed her forehead to the wall, trying to stop the room from spinning. Later that day, Olamide approached her in the garden, alone this time. He carried a ring box in one hand and a folded cloth in the other. "My father says we can make this easy," he said. "Or we can make it hard. You don't want to make it hard, Lena. I like you." There was something in his tone, not anger, but entitlement, the kind that comes from a lifetime of being told yes. "You'll grow to love me. Many women do. You're just scared. Foreign girls are always scared at first." He reached out to touch her face, and she flinched violently. "Don't," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment before slipping the ring box into his pocket and walking away, whistling a tune she didn't recognize. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She mapped every creak of the hallway, memorized the turns of the staircase, timed the guards' patrols. She wasn't going to wait for the ceremony. She was going to run. But deep down, a darker question gnawed at her. What if others hadn't been so lucky? Lena rose before dawn, her heart pounding with quiet determination as she slipped out of the stiff linens and zipped her backpack in slow, deliberate movements. The moonlight hadn't yet faded from the horizon, casting shadows along the hotel corridors that danced and writhed with every step she took. Her plan was simple but urgent. Sneak through the back courtyard, climb over the eastern wall where the stone appeared worn and the vines hung thick, and catch a ride from anyone, literally anyone, heading toward the highway. She had hidden her remaining cash inside her shoe, had memorized the hotel's layout, and even stashed a rock in her pocket just in case she needed to break a lock or a window. But as soon as she stepped into the hallway, her stomach dropped. One of the staff, the same young girl who had once handed her the cryptic note, was standing outside her door, barefoot, holding a tray of tea. "You'll miss breakfast," she said softly, eyes unreadable. Lena didn't respond. She simply turned and ran. She made it to the courtyard before the guards caught wind. But the gate, which had once seemed like a mere decorative fixture, groaned as it swung inward, and behind it stood Mr. Becker, flanked by two other men she hadn't seen before, both dressed in black and both holding long wooden staffs. "Lena," he called gently, "you dishonor us with this fear. You are our guest, our family." She backed away slowly, gripping her backpack. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't keep me here." Mr. Becker sighed, as though she were a stubborn child rather than a trapped adult. "We only want what is best for you. Please, don't embarrass yourself further." That word, embarrass, rattled through her like a gunshot. That's when Lena bolted. She sprinted toward the kitchen wing, dodging around the side garden and using her elbow to smash open a screen that led into the storage hallway. Inside, she ducked past crates of dried goods and sacks of rice, finally slipping into the kitchen, where an elderly cook stood frozen mid-chop. Their eyes locked, and something passed between them, recognition, pity, or maybe complicity. But the woman said nothing as Lena darted through the rear pantry door and into the alley behind the hotel. She ran, heart thudding so hard she thought it might burst, pushing through thick brush and ignoring the thorns that tore at her clothes. She didn't stop until she reached a narrow dirt road, empty except for a boy riding a rusted bicycle. She waved him down, pleading in broken Yoruba and urgent gestures. The boy stared, wide-eyed, then pointed down the road. "There is a checkpoint in 2 miles. You must go fast." She nodded, breathless, and broke into a run again, praying no one had followed. But luck wasn't on her side. Halfway to the checkpoint, a dusty pickup truck rumbled behind her. She dove into the tall grass, crawling low, her pulse hammering in her ears. Through the weeds, she saw the vehicle slow, 2 figures in the cab scanning the fields. It was Olamide and another man. "Lena," he shouted, voice deceptively cheerful. "Don't be foolish. You're tired. Come home." She stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, until the truck roared off into the distance. When she was certain they were gone, she emerged, scraped and dizzy, and followed the boy's directions until she reached a small police checkpoint. 2 officers, a table, and a radio. Relief flooded her, until she spoke. The officers listened in silence as Lena explained her situation. The gifts, the room changes, the proposal, the locked gates, the attempt to flee. She expected outrage. Instead, the older officer exchanged a look with the younger one and asked, "Did you eat the cola nut?" Lena blinked, confused. "What?" He leaned forward, eyes sharp. "In our customs, accepting certain offerings is binding. A guest who receives blessings and returns them is no longer a guest. They become one of us." She backed away, her relief morphing into panic. "Are you going to help me or not?" The officer sighed, then reached into his breast pocket and slid a card across the table. "You should speak to this man. Journalist. Not everything can be handled by the uniform." Lena stared at the card. No badge. No radio call. No assistance. By now, Olamide's truck had likely doubled back, and Lena knew she had minutes before they retraced her steps. She grabbed the card and fled, following the highway into a nearby town, where she paid a woman at a roadside stand to let her hide in the back of her shop. While crouched beneath dusty sacks of grain and smoked fish, Lena turned the card over in her fingers, trying to remember everything she'd seen, every clue. The note from the staff girl. The changed room. The hotel's missing guest book. She remembered a glimpse into the manager's office a day earlier, when the door had been ajar. A bulletin board filled with photographs, smiling women, foreign faces, all in traditional attire. At the time, she'd thought it was part of the decor. Now, it felt like something else. A pattern. A collection. After nightfall, Lena made it to a cyber cafe and accessed a battered old desktop. Her fingers trembled as she typed in the hotel's name. The search results were sparse. No reviews. No recent posts. No social media. Nothing beyond a generic listing with a few outdated photos. Suspiciously clean. Too clean. That's when she searched the image metadata from a photo she'd taken on her first day. She uploaded it into a reverse image tool, and her blood turned to ice. The same building, different name, popped up in a travel forum from 3 years ago. A woman from Italy had posted about a similar stay. Her final comment read, "They said I was chosen. I laughed at first. Then I stopped laughing." There were no replies after that. No follow-ups. Her account had been inactive since. The dusty cyber cafe smelled faintly of burnt plastic and sweat, but Lena barely noticed as she clicked through archived travel forums, her eyes scanning every word with increasing dread. The woman from Italy wasn't the only one. A Canadian backpacker had written a cryptic blog post a year prior about being spiritually adopted during a stay in a small Nigerian guest house. Another post, from a Swedish woman, simply said, "If they give you anything handmade, don't take it." That was all, no photos, no profile, just that warning. Lena leaned back in the plastic chair, heart racing, her mouth dry. There was a pattern here, but it wasn't fully visible yet. These stories had slipped under the radar, dismissed as eccentric travel anecdotes, or buried beneath a wave of influencer content that romanticized authentic local experiences. But Lena had seen the other side, the calculated orchestration of these traditions, twisted and weaponized. And now she needed proof. She scrolled through her own photos again, zeroing in on one she had taken of a hallway portrait in the hotel. It was framed beside a Yoruba proverb she hadn't understood at the time. Now, through an online translation forum, the meaning hit her like a gut punch. What is given in the name of tradition must never be refused, or tradition will take it back. Beneath the image, the comment thread had exploded with heated debate, some praising the cultural beauty of the saying, others warning travelers not to be too trusting. But buried in the thread was a link, an anonymous tip-off to a whistleblower site run by a local investigative journalist named Nyai Adebayo. The same name on the card the officer had given her. Lena clicked the link. The site loaded slowly, clunky but active. On the homepage was a headline in bold red font, "The Hospitality Trap, Foreign Women, Vanishing Trails, and the Shadow Networks of Rural Nigeria." Her breath caught. The article was long, dense, and damning. Nyai wrote of dozens of foreign tourists, mostly solo female travelers, who had stayed in boutique hotels throughout specific regions and then either left the country under strange circumstances or simply went dark. No police reports, no news coverage, just vanishing trails of digital footprints. Lena scanned the story feverishly. He had photos, too, screenshots of messages, grainy CCTV stills, even partial guest records. Then, toward the end, a name leapt out at her like a ghost from the screen. Becker Holdings. The name was listed as the corporate shell for multiple hospitality venues, all of them family-run, all of them in regions known for their resistance to modern legal frameworks and fierce protection of ancestral customs. The hotels didn't operate under chains or regulations. They advertised only through word of mouth or ultra-local booking sites. Most weren't even listed on Google Maps until recently. And Mr. Becker, Lena realized with chilling certainty, wasn't just a manager. He was a key player in a network that blurred the lines between arranged marriage, spiritual rites, and human trafficking. The article even included an intercepted email between B Holdings and a supposed matchmaker agency in Europe, coded in polite business speak but referencing placement successes and future unions. Her stomach turned. Desperate, Lena emailed Nii through the encrypted address on the site. She poured her entire story into that message. Names, dates, photos, everything. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She attached the last selfie she had taken in the hotel room before the madness began. If something happened to her, she wanted people to know her face, to remember her as more than a statistic. She hit send, heart thudding, and wiped the keyboard clean before fleeing the cafe. Later that night, she got a reply. It was brief. I believe you. Meet me in Ibadan. Tomorrow. Do not stay in any hotel. Bring all evidence. No signature. No further detail. Lena stared at the message, then deleted her browsing history and slipped out the back of the cafe under cover of darkness. She spent the night in a small, locked storage shed behind a textile shop, wrapped in a dusty top and clinging to her backpack like it was life itself. She barely slept. Every sound outside felt like a footstep, every gust of wind like a whisper meant only for her. When dawn broke, Lena made her way to the main road and paid a woman selling oranges to help her flag down a bus to Ibadan. It was cramped, noisy, and unbearably hot, but she didn't care. The farther she got from that hotel, the lighter her chest felt, until, an hour into the drive, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. No text. Just a single incoming call. Lena didn't answer. Seconds later, the number called again. Then again. And then it stopped. Her phone fell silent. But now her hands were shaking. The signal was back. That meant they were tracking her. Watching. Waiting. She arrived in Ibadan late that afternoon and found a crowded food market near the meeting spot Nii had sent. It was chaotic, filled with vendors shouting, children weaving between stalls, and the thick scent of spices and sweat. She stood near the edge of the crowd, scanning for any sign of him. After 10 agonizing minutes, a man in a dark blue cap approached. "Lena?" he asked quietly. She nodded. He handed her a newspaper, one of his own articles stuffed inside, and gestured for her to follow without looking back. They walked for what felt like hours through winding alleys until they reached a dimly lit compound. Inside, Lena showed him everything: the bracelet, the photos, the voice memos she'd secretly recorded. Nii listened, grave and silent. "I've been trying to crack this for 3 years, he finally said. "You just gave me the missing piece." Then he looked her square in the eye. "But if we publish this, they won't just come after me. They'll come after you, too. Are you ready for that?" Lena didn't answer right away. She thought of the other women, the vanished faces, the unfinished stories, the silence that blanketed their truths. Then she looked up, eyes steady. "Yes." The days that followed moved like shadow puppets behind thick fog, fragmented, surreal, and charged with invisible danger. Lena stayed off-grid with Nii, tucked away in a safe house that had once belonged to his cousin before the man fled the country under political threats. The apartment was tiny, its walls covered with soundproof foam and newspaper clippings of vanished girls and mysterious hospitality centers. The air inside smelled faintly of old printers and paranoia. Nii had a plan. They would compile Lena's story, cross-reference it with the records he had gathered, and release everything to a trusted international journalist who had worked on trafficking exposés before. But first, he had to get Lena out of the country, quietly, and soon. Nii arranged for a forged travel pass through a contact who owed him a favor, along with a discreet ride to Lagos under the guise of cargo delivery. Lena was dressed in a shawl and oversized clothes, her hair dyed darker and tucked under a cap. Her ID, once neatly tucked into her wallet, now sat between the pages of a hollowed-out notebook. Every checkpoint was a test of nerve. At one stop, an officer peered into the back of the van, flashlight beam slicing across crates of produce and half-concealed passengers. The driver cracked a joke in Yoruba. The officer laughed. They waved them through. Only after 15 minutes of silence did Lena unclench her fists. In Lagos, she waited in a crowded portside apartment for 2 days, sleeping on a mat beside an open window with a fan that clacked like a metronome of dread. Nii kept in touch through burner phones, sending encrypted texts with updates on the article's progress. The Dutch contact confirmed. They're interested. They want corroboration. Lena recorded a video testimony, voice steady but eyes glassy, speaking not just for herself but for every woman who had disappeared into silence. She handed over the audio files, the bracelet, even the henna-stained scarf the village women had wrapped around her wrists. "If I vanish," she told him, "this all has to go out anyway." Nyai nodded, solemn. "We're already past the point of no return." Her exit from Nigeria was orchestrated like a spy operation. A last-minute flight, cash only, paid through intermediaries, and booked under a different name. She walked through the airport with her heart hammering, afraid to make eye contact, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid someone from the hotel had already greased the right palms. But no one stopped her. No one questioned the documents. The plane lifted off the runway, and only when it broke through the clouds did Lena finally weep, not from fear, but from the unbearable relief of freedom. She landed in Lisbon. No family was there. No friends. Just space. And silence. Back in Nigeria, Nyai published the exposé. It went live at midnight, translated into 3 languages, with Lena's identity partially redacted. The article spread like wildfire, picked up by advocacy groups, international watchdogs, and eventually by Western news outlets hungry for real-world horror. The Nigerian government issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, calling the claims culturally insensitive misrepresentations. But within a week, the hotel Lena had stayed at was raided and shut down. No arrests were made, but the Bakare name vanished from its signage, its listing, and even its business registry. It was like the family never existed. Lena returned to the States months later, but she didn't go back to New York. She moved to Portland, where no one knew her, where the air was cleaner and the people didn't flinch when she hesitated before answering basic questions. She got a job at a bookstore, started therapy, and changed her phone number. Her parents still didn't know the full story. She told them she had seen too much and left it at that. Some nights, she dreamt of the courtyard beneath the jacaranda tree, of Olamide's voice humming a tune she could never quite place, of the hotel manager's eyes watching her across the table like he already owned her. One morning, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB stick and a note that read, "It's still happening." The footage showed another woman, maybe Eastern European, dressed in a traditional wrapper, being introduced to a new husband. Lena felt bile rise in her throat. She contacted Nyai, only to find that his number had been disconnected. A message on his site read, "Temporarily suspended due to digital interference." Lena sat in her apartment, the shadow stretching long over her hardwood floor, and realized something awful: the article hadn't stopped the machine. It had only dented the wheel. Still, Lena refused to disappear. She began volunteering with a non-profit for trafficked women, using a false name, sharing parts of her story in workshops and safe houses. She never revealed the country, never showed her face in public interviews. But her voice, raw, resolute, and filled with razor-edged clarity, cut through the static of statistics. She was not just a survivor. She was a witness. And while she had escaped the hotel, she would never escape the responsibility of what she now knew. Because somewhere, right now, another girl was arriving. Another basket was being prepared. Another guest was about to become a bride. And Lena had learned one unshakable truth: the most terrifying prisons are not built of walls or bars, but of silence, tradition, and the lies people tell themselves in the name of culture.